From your notes there, we're going to do prokaryotes. Why? What's the point? Let me tell you. Today we're going to start it actually. Remember the soap lab we started?
Yeah.
Okay, we did the soap lab about a week ago. Oh, no, about a month ago. And it's probably dried out enough. It's hard enough to be able to scrape off some soap and test whether it's going to do anything. A lot of you guys think by washing your hands with soap, you're killing bacteria. We're going to try to prove that that's not really the case. I don't think your soap's going to do a heck of a lot to kill bacteria. We're going to grow some bacteria and see what it does, see what your soap does. We're going to test against other things. We'll try to use those hand sanitizers. Anybody use those all the time? You're welcome to bring one in. I will test it. We could test that.
Those Bath and Body Works ones are just for the smell.
I'm just saying. You're welcome to bring it in, and we could test to see what it does. And we'll also test an antibiotic, which of course does kill bacteria, and it'll be pretty obvious what it does. So we have to grow bacteria. And I want to talk to you about what bacteria is then. We're going to grow it in a Petri plate. You've ever seen Petri plates? Those round, thin discs.
We'll do this today.
We're going to start it today. If you look back there, you got a second period. I'll tell you what we'll be doing. It's pretty complicated. You will not actually grow the bacteria until tomorrow. We'll streak the plates. You're going to start the lab. I do have a lab to begin with it. And I'll talk about that. It's 2 labs. It's going to take you guys 3 days to do it, starting it today, continuing tomorrow, and then looking at your results on Monday. All right? Anyway, we got to talk about what bacteria are then in order to do this, and that's what I want to do right now. Prokaryotes are what bacteria are. That's the general classification. And if you look at your notes, it should be a 3. I told you these Roman numerals will be off because of the way I've changed things this year. So those notes are going to be a little bit different. I haven't had too many troubles with it, and pretty much if you kept the notes in order, it doesn't really matter what the Roman numeral is anyway. All right, prokaryotes. I asked you. This is one of those chapters, one of those units. It's only going to be a one-day thing, where in biology is a lot like this, where prefixes and suffixes are big. They're really important. Can you figure out, you've heard both of those before. Matter of fact, I heard you, when you first saw it, some people say prokaryotes, some people, oh, what about eukaryotes? You remember hearing that from biology. If you know prefixes, you know what this means. What does pro in front of something usually mean? And no, it doesn't mean professional. That's short for professional. What does it mean when used in something?
One?
No. People think one or singular. No.
How is it good?
No. U means good. Eukaryotes. EU. In front of something means good or true.
So pro's bad?
Pro doesn't mean bad. Pro means before or early. All right. So you've heard of proactive. Proactive. What does it mean to be proactive? Or probiotics. You've heard of that. It means proactive means you solve a problem before it comes up. You're proactive in that respect. You know, you don't let a problem come up. Probiotics are the things you take, supposedly. I don't know how, Jenny McCarthy and all that stuff really works to help, your digestive system and stuff like that. Anyway, pro as a prefix generally means before. Karyote means nucleus. So prokaryotes, no true nucleus. It's before they had nuclei. Okay, eukaryotes have a true nucleus. You know what else is kind of, you can think of pro, you can think of pri, because you all think you think of primordial or pre, almost think of it that way. And that might help you remember what pro means before. Okay, so no true nucleus for a prokaryote. We're talking here about bacteria and viruses, and they are all over the place. They're the most widespread organisms on the planet. I mean, they outnumber us by a lot. I mean, it's not even close. And they include viruses and bacteria, but we're only going to talk about bacteria. You'll see plenty of viruses this winter when you get your colds. All right, now let's talk about bacteria, and I'm going to talk about bacteria in several different ways, really. I'm going to talk about how you can classify them based on a couple of different ways, what their functions are, and all that stuff. All right, this is like a mini microbiology course, which is always one of my favorite courses in college. And I think, believe it or not, this is an entire, what I'm doing in one day, obviously, is not going to touch on an entire course. But you can take I remember I told you there's an entire course you could take on polymer chemistry. There's an entire course you could take on organic. There's an entire course you can take on microbiology and biochemistry. All of these have entire courses on it, year-long. In some cases, semester-long courses.
Like on just organic.
Organic would be an entire year you can take.
Holy crap, that would be hell.
Yeah,
That would be.
it is. And anybody who wants to be a pharmacist, you want to be a doctor,
No longer.
you want to be a MD, you basically have to take organic. Now, the good news is you would be very well prepared after having this, because most high schools do not have any organic. None. All right? Certainly they don't have as much as you guys had. If you did have a little bit as part of an AP class, it would have been 2 weeks. That's about how long you're able to spend on organic in an AP class. I've seen the curriculum. 2 weeks. Maybe 1 lab or 2 at the most. Whereas you guys will have had half a year on organic. All right, we'll have covered it. So you guys, as much as I know it is difficult, you would be well prepared.
So how much does our half year of organic?
I mean, it's got stuff from throughout the year.
Oh, so
For example, by the time we get done with mechanisms, that stuff you may not get till. Some of the stuff we'll do in stereochemistry is the stuff that you get till even the second semester, depending on how they decide to teach it.
So it's just like a summary of it.
It's a summary of it, which is, every one of them can be much more detailed, as you'll see. Mechanisms in particular, I'm going to go over 3 mechanisms, and they can get really, really difficult. So remember the synthesis ones I told you about? I can have synthesis that take up the entire back page of a test. All right, you guys did ones that took up maybe 3 or 4 steps. That was hard enough. All right, bacteria. Let's classify them. Let's classify them based on, first of all, their need for oxygen. I can do that. I can classify what they look like. I can do that. I can classify on how they stain with different kinds of stains. All right, let's start with the need for oxygen. What do you think we call, well, I think I already have names down there. Again, prefixes, anaerobic. What is that going to mean?
I don't know.
Without oxygen. We saw anaerobic fermentation. We didn't want air to get into our fermentations. That's why we had to bubble through water, remember? These kind cannot live in the presence of oxygen. Okay? So you didn't want oxygen to get in there. We didn't want oxygen in for another reason, a main reason, for the fermentations. I didn't want other kinds of bacteria that can live in oxygen to produce other side products. For example, if you're making alcohol, you don't want vinegar. All right, and you can get vinegar from other kinds of organisms. More oxygen that's in there, the more vinegar you're going to get. All right, so anaerobic means no oxygen, and for each of these, by the way, you're going to recognize quite a few of these you're going to recognize the actual disease that they cause. All right, this one, if you look at it, I bet you can figure out. What do you think is the
Botulism.
Botulism? Exactly. Over here, if you haven't heard of it, your grandparents probably have. Botulinum, Clostridium botulinum, is the organism that causes botulism, which is food poisoning. And if your grandparents ever did canning, they worried about that. So they made sure that they boiled everything. Maybe even they used a pressure cooker to kill all the bacteria. And then they sealed in those jars that had a little lid with a pop top on it, right? And if that lid popped up, you didn't need it, because that meant there was something going on in there. Some kind of gas was being produced by some other organism. It may or may not have been botulism, but either way, you shouldn't need it because you don't know. Okay, and that's what this stuff looks like right over here. You have a picture of it up there. Okay, that's the botulinum organism. Now, this guy right here is another one you've heard of. Okay, now I want you to notice something else, because it's going to be on the next slide. I won't want to come back to this. Notice how these guys are like rod-shaped. These guys are like circular, and they're kind of in twos. That's all going to be another way to classify them based on what they look like and how they group together. Okay, this guy right here is called an obligate aerobe. Obligate meaning you're obligated to it. You know, you have no choice. You have to have oxygen around. There are guys who don't need oxygen, but can live in it. They're called facultative. We'll talk about that in a minute.
Wait, you say they don't need oxygen, but they can live in it?
Yeah, they don't. Yeah, right. They can do either way. These are obligates. Anaerobes means they cannot have oxygen. Obligate aerobes mean they must have oxygen. And then we're going to have the next one's going to be guys that can live in either or. Okay. And this guy, you ever hear of this one? What do you think that causes? Exactly. You've all heard of meningitis. If you haven't, you're going to hear about it when you go to college. Because one of the things they worry about in college is where you're living all together in dorms is an outbreak of meningitis. You may even hear about it over the winter. In I'm sure you remember sometime, maybe you don't remember, but sometime over the past 5 years, every winter or sometime there's an outbreak in a high school, even around here, where they'll close the high school sometimes if there's an outbreak of meningitis, because it is very dangerous. Spinal meningitis, depending on what kind, there are different kinds. It can kill you. All right. And so if there's an outbreak, if there's even one kid has it, they sometimes are they overly cautious about it, and we even close the school until they have people tested and double check that it's not around anywhere else, because it is extremely contagious as well.
Does it make you sick?
It basically causes, I'm not positive all the symptoms and everything, but I'm pretty sure it attacks the nervous system, like the spinal cord, the brain, and it causes swelling, and it can kill you. It actually can cause brain damage and can kill you. So that's meningitis. That's this guy right here. Okay, and then there's facultative aerobes, which basically can survive in either. All right, so you've heard of some of these, and you're going to hear almost everyone I've chosen as an example, as a representative example, you'll have heard of before. Okay, it is interesting because a lot of these terms, even I remember as a kid, did not understand. Like, you all have heard some of these terms, and you think to yourself, I even like misspelled it, even thinking of it a different way. Like, for example, when we start classifying guys by their shapes, all right, the first one's going to be a favorite, I'm sure. Oh, by the way, it's called morphology. Morphology, again, morph. What does morph mean? Does not mean change. It means shape, right? Because remember, we saw in Chem 1 for amorphous solids, like glass, butter. We saw it for Chem 2, amorphous carbon, all right, where we have carbon that's just mishmashed, like in charcoal and stuff. And now we're seeing it again in for the word morph. That suffix and prefixes, if you could put those together on a test, you can a lot of times figure things out. All right, now one of the first ones that I'm sure Bulkley will like will be Caucus. Yes, Caucus. The word Caucus, if you look at Caucus, it kind of has, I always think of, it's easy to remember because they are circular. It's not pronounced the same, but they're spherical, circle, that's what I think of, Caucus. And most of these do have a reason they have that prefix or suffix from some Greek or Roman, whatever.
You would think if somebody had some sense of humor, they'd make the rod-shaped ones called Caucus.
No, they're called Bacillus.
But nobody.
I'm sorry.
They couldn't do that.
Anyway, so these guys are spherical, and some examples would be, again, two words you've heard before but never really realized, right? Strep throat and staph infections, right? Exactly. Now think about this. Streptococcus, the strep part and the staph part come from the prefix that means how they're organized together. I'm going to put those down here in a second. The coccus part tells me what they look like, their morphology. I can have streptococcus, I can have streptobacillus, I can have streptospirillum, I can have strep. It doesn't necessarily have to be. You don't know which one we're talking about for your strep throat. But that's what they are talking about. When they say strep, they mean strepta something, streptococcus, streptobacillus, that causes your strep, what we call strep throat, which is, of course, also very dangerous, can cause a high fever, and if left untreated, it can kill you. Staph, again, this is the one I was telling you about, kind of when I was in school, or not in school, but yeah, when I was in high school, college, I worked at a hospital, and they used to always have things on how to prevent staph infections. Now, I don't know how much you guys realize this, but when I was a kid, I used to think it meant staph infections, as in S-T-A-F-F. The staff of the hospital has how to prevent the staff of the hospital from having an infection. That's how I always thought of it. I know.
How did that happen?
How bad is that? So, but actually, it has to do with staph. You still don't. You may laugh at that, but do you know what staph means? pH with it on there. No, but I'm going to tell you what it means. It means it's actually from, I think, the Greek for grapes. And those are bacterium that actually occur in clusters or clumps like grapes. Okay, bacillus are rod-shaped. Here's your bacillus example right here. All right, here's your coccus example right here. All right, there's circles or spheres, I should say, in a chain. In that case, we'll talk about what that means. And bacillus, one of the more classic ones you can
E. coli.
is E. coli, exactly. It's hard to pronounce Escherichia coli, so most people call it E. coli. And most people, again, are afraid of it. You think of E. coli, you think of, oh, if I eat meat that's raw or not cooked well enough, the center of the hamburger is pink, I could get E. coli poisoning. And you could die from it. Some people have. But you have to remember, E. coli exists in your bodies right now. All right, where? Different kinds of E. coli exist in your body right now in your intestines. All right, and the problem is, it's one of the reasons why if you have surgery, you have to be careful. You'll often be taking antibiotics afterwards because you don't want that. Bacteria is okay if it stays where it is. Your mouth has like a dozen kinds of bacteria in it, but if you get bit, you ever hear the saying like a human mouth is dirtier than a dog's mouth? I mean, I don't know how true that is, but the fact is, if it's one of the more dangerous things you can do is not just because you can become a zombie, but because if you get bit by somebody else, all right, a lot of that bacteria, which is fine in your mouth, does not hurt you. If it gets in your blood, can cause big problems, can get you a major infection. It depends on where the bacteria is.
Don't bite people.
Yeah, so don't bite people.
Isn't that why when you like kill an animal, you have to take out the intestine?
Exactly. That's why, for example, when you have hamburg meat, which is a mishmash of a lot of different meats, you'll often have some E. coli from the intestines that accidentally got in there. There's not really any way you can keep it from ever happening, and the only way to kill it is to cook it all the way through. So you should not eat red meat, like red, when it's still red in the center. Some people still say, oh, I don't care, I'm going to have my, and for the most part, you get away with it. But it is more dangerous. Spirillum, of course, I think this is another one where the word kind of says what he is. All right, he's a spiral. That's this guy down here. Okay, you can see it's kind of a spiral shape. And a good example of this would be the guy who causes Lyme disease. The organism that causes Lyme disease is a spirillum organism, and that's become very popular recently, having finally isolated people. I mean, it's very difficult. A lot of people who have Lyme disease. They say the test is not always 100% positive. I mean, I know people who, I know all the whole gambit. People who've been tested and say they positively have Lyme disease. People who said, well, they had all the symptoms of Lyme disease, but they don't. They never tested positive for it. But basically, this is the organism they believe causes it. Okay.
I didn't know it was spelled like that.
Well,
it was L-I-M.
Yeah, that's another thing. Again, like Staph, Lyme disease, you probably think it was like with lime water. A lot of people think lime water would be like water that's lime. We used it in Chem 1, but we used it for it's actually lime as in limestone, as in like the calcium oxide that you put on.
So it probably doesn't taste the same.
Probably not. This is not going to be like lemons and limes. You're not going to put this in your Corona. All right, now let's take a look at these different possibilities for classification. Some of you will. I don't. So look, I realized, I went to the next slide just thinking after I talked about this for a second that I explained it, and then somebody asked me a question and went back, and everybody had the same misconception. So I need to make sure you understand this. You might even want to write something down on this. The top part of this talks about their shape. You can even write the word shape, okay, next to the top half. So they can be spherical, rod-shaped, or spiral. Another Caucus, Bacillus, spirillum. The bottom does not mean how it's shaped, but rather how they're organized. Diplo means there'll be two. You could have Diplococcus or Diplobacillus or Diplospirillum. That just means you have two. Remember back to the previous page. Okay, let's go back to that one. All right, let's go back to that page. Okay, remember this guy right here. Okay, that's Diplococcus. All right, because you notice they're in twos and they're circles. Okay, if you look at this guy right here, what would you classify this guy as? Streptococcus, because it's in a string. Okay. These guys right here, it's hard to tell. They look like they might be. I